Ananda Developments is an Aquis-listed UK pharmaceutical company which focuses in on growing and providing carbon-zero medical cannabis. Medical cannabis was legalised in the UK back in 2018. Now there are more than 25,000 medical cannabis patients in the UK now, and that number is growing rapidly. Despite this, patient access to medical cannabis is still limited, and 100% of medical cannabis products available to UK patients are imported from abroad. Now, this is where Ananda Developments is focused. So joining us now to discuss this and more is Melissa Sturgess, Chief Executive of the company. Melissa, it's great to be able to catch up with you. Before we get into where the company is going and what it's doing now, let's just wind the clock back to 2018 and talk a little bit about the genesis of the business and how you've moved over the last 4 or 5 years or so.
Yeah, thanks, and it's good to be here. Thank you for having me. We started this company in 2018 when we saw what was happening in the medical cannabis space more widely, across the world, in other jurisdictions, and really believed strongly that we were going to see this medicine come to the UK in a fairly large way, because of its benefits that I think are pretty well undisputed now. So we lifted the company with a second quote on Aquis back in 2018. Long story short, I suppose we partnered with a team that had been growing medical cannabis for research for GW Pharmaceuticals. So we started to work with them on trialing cultivation techniques and doing some genetic stabilization work. So that's been ongoing since 2019. We applied to the Home Office to grow for research. So we've been doing that work really since then and making great progress, growing thousands of plants, done a lot of analysis work. And more recently now we've been focused on talking to potential builders of our manufacturing and processing facility. So that's what's been happening for us over the last couple of years. And yeah, you mentioned the patient numbers. It started small. I think when medical cannabis was legalized, obviously there were, a couple of thousand patients. I think it's actually gone past 25,000. I think we're past 30,000 patients now. And the key to that is getting more and more doctors prescribing, more and more specialists prescribing medical cannabis. So that's all about training doctors, providing access through clinics, and providing product. And where we really want to be on the flower side from our own facility is providing medical cannabis flower into the UK market. There is extraordinary demand simply on the basis that the supply chains from offshore aren't particularly reliable. And I must say we are actually approached on a really regular basis. Probably every couple of weeks we get a pharmacy group, a manufacturing group asking us if we can supply directly to them from a UK source.
You mentioned the listing. Why Aquis?
It's perfect for small companies that want to grow. It gives us, pardon the pun, what I think it gives us is all the best flexibility, and we have a team at Aquis that support us and talk to us and help us get our message out to the wider investing community. But it also means that we keep ourselves, or it keeps us, holds us to account in terms of regulatory standards and corporate governance. And I think ultimately that just makes it easier to run a proper company if you have those requirements that you have to meet on an ongoing basis. So it's sort of the best of everything. We get the flexibility, but we get the regulation.
Yeah. Let me ask you about some of the recent news flow, because there's been some exciting developments recently. This acquisition of the subsidiary of MRX Global, MRX Medical. What's that do? Yeah. What's that do for Ananda? Why the deal?
Yeah. Look, good question. In the UK, most patients, or pretty much all patients who take medical cannabis, are prescribed a combination of flower and oil. So the flower is prescribed for breakthrough pain, for nighttime sleep, those sorts of things. And oil is prescribed for a baseline effect to give baseline support through the day and also at night. So we want to make sure that we have an offering that covers both flower and oil. The flower strategy is well on track in our growing up in Lincolnshire. And what we wanted to do was bring oils to the market a little bit faster than we would be able to if we did that as well just from our facility. So by acquiring MRX Medical, we have medical cannabis oils that can be launched immediately. And the absolute bonus in this space is that our first oil that we're releasing is also going to be used in 2 phase 2 clinical trials, randomized controlled trials. And that's pretty big news for medical cannabis. At the moment, all oil that's prescribed, apart from the GW licensed products, all oil is prescribed as what's called an unlicensed special. So no medical claims can be made about these products. They are prescribed by a specialist only. The oil that we have, which is going to be used in these randomized controlled trials, if those trials are successful, we really believe strongly that we will open the gate to the NHS supporting the funding. At the moment, again, going back to what's currently available on the market for patients, everything is under a private prescription. The NHS, apart from 3 or 4 prescriptions, the NHS does not support medical cannabis. So we think that we can get early stage revenues for our shareholders. We can get really good quality medicines in the hands of our patients, and that we have the potential to unlock the NHS, which would be a really big prize, obviously, for shareholders, but a huge prize for patients who need affordable medicine.
I think in years to come, it'll be interesting to look back at this moment in the history of Ananda, and of course in the history of this prescription basis, to try and get the point at which we can then say the NHS is on board completely. And I know that'll be a game changer for your company. Let me just quickly ask about some of the funding of this. My understanding is that these clinical trials, you've now received commitments of external grant funding, I understand. That's the commitment that other people are seeing in this. How much was that, and what are you going to use that for?
Yeah, so the trials themselves are being conducted by the University of Edinburgh. There are 2 trials. One is into CIPN, which stands for chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy. So basically neuropathic pain from patients who have been through chemotherapy. Big problem. I think it's something like 160,000 new patients a year who really suffer badly after chemotherapy. That's being undertaken by some specialists at Edinburgh University. And also, and the timing is perfect, it is Endometriosis Action Month in the UK. Another trial for a phase 2 clinical trial into endometriosis also being run out of University of Edinburgh. And what we're doing is we're providing the medicine for those trials. So it's our formulation that will be used in these clinical trials. £1.55 million of external grant funding has been secured for these clinical trials, which is, as you say, it's really cool. It means that there is a third party view that these trials really have value and are going to add value. And of course, people don't fund clinical trials thinking that they're not going to work. So, we're part of a wider group of optimists about the efficacy and the ultimate potential of these medicines.
What do you think it is that's causing the blockage of maybe an understanding of what you're trying to do, or trying to get these medications onto the market through the NHS and other medical organisations? What's the stumbling block?
I think a lot of it is just time. It is still a new medicine, and specialists and doctors, understandably, is my view, are cautious about new medicines. They want to see evidence. Doctors call for evidence. The government has legalised medical cannabis, so the government's position is we've made the medicine legal, so it is up to industry to get in and provide the evidence for these medicines so that doctors can prescribe them. I think also from an education perspective, the endocannabinoid system, which is the bodily system, which is basically responsible for homeostasis. So it's a fine-tuning balancing system within the body. That's only just been recently started to be taught at universities, at medical school. So we've got an environment where we've got a new medicine that acts on a part of the body that is really only just being understood. And we've got the aspect of the medicine, which is it is a controlled drug. So we've got a strict kind of regulatory environment around the Home Office guidelines and the MHRA guidelines. So I think it's time. We just have to keep pushing really hard. We have to do really good science. We have to produce really good medicines, and we have to give doctors the comfort to prescribe. And it is coming. It is happening. It is happening. And the UK is gold standard. This is a gold standard jurisdiction for pharmaceuticals. So we are going to meet the highest standards in the world.
To what degree is this proposed appointment to the board of Ananda of Professor Clive Page helping you in this argument? I guess when you bring someone in who is what I believe Professor of Pharmacology at King's College London, I would venture to suggest he's fairly heavyweight in the business. I mean, this is presumably all part of this idea, is to trying to build up this argument to get this released into the broad market. Yeah,
look, it certainly helps to have the guidance and support of the real deal, and Professor Page is obviously the real deal. He's an inflammation expert, and that's what we really believe internally this cannabis medicine is really good for. It's basically really good for complex chronic inflammatory pain conditions. And as we all know, those are the modern ailments of the world. They are fibromyalgia, endometriosis, rheumatic pain, those sorts of conditions for which I think the NHS spends £5 billion a year trying to treat and not doing it particularly effectively in many instances. And if they do it effectively, there are lots of very negative side effects. So the space is really big and the opportunity is huge. And Professor Clive Page is an expert in inflammation. So that is his area of expertise, is understanding the inflammatory cascade, the pathways of inflammation in the body, and they are really complex. And cannabis is a complex medicine, so having a complex system and a complex medicine, makes sense.
Let's also include a chat about what you're doing as a business, your stabilisation program, genetic program and commercial preparatory work in Lincolnshire, I know continues at pace, and the work is well underway, my understanding is, for the construction of a commercial pilot plant. Explain more about this, and of course the cost implications of this I think are interesting as well. Speaking as you are to investors, they've got to know that what you're trying to achieve here is going to be commercially viable, and of course the costs are in sort of proportion to all that. As a company, what are you doing, and what are the costs involved in getting this up and running?
The area in which we grow in Lincolnshire, and we're soon to release a white paper on this, is some of the best growing conditions in the world, and we are able to achieve crops at very low cost of production because we have extremely good daylight. Just think about the crops that are grown in that part of, in Lincolnshire, in the salad leaf industry and agricultural industry more widely. Actually, I think we had the best crop ever of wheat was grown in Lincolnshire. I think it was globally the best crop ever in Lincolnshire last year. So it is extremely fertile, and it is a great place to grow something like cannabis. So we can do it at an extremely low cost, without artificial light and without artificial heat. If you think about the history of growing cannabis, it's been about attics and basements, and it's been about big light box facilities in Canada, and that's actually not the environment in which cannabis necessarily has to grow. So we have these perfect conditions, therefore low OPEX and a low CAPEX solution as well to growing medical cannabis, because we're not choosing to grow with artificial light and artificial heat. And actually the cannabinoids themselves and the other secondary metabolites in the cannabis plant actually perform better under natural light than they do under any artificial light that you can put on the plant. So we'll have a low CAPEX, low OPEX solution and a very high quality flower for vaping. So
these are not in polytunnels, these are just open to the air, are they?
No, they will. So they are in polytunnels, so not in open fields, but in very low CAPEX. Polytunnels, low capital polytunnels, not those sort of rigid, expensive light boxes.
Okay, just briefly, also just touch on the security of the crop. Presumably they have to be policed to some degree because of the crops themselves might be appealing to certain members of society. What do you do about that? You talk about low OPEX, low CAPEX, but presumably there is quite a cost involved in this aspect.
Yes, of course. I mean, our license to operate is basically a home office license that has very strict security requirements, and we meet all of those where obviously we are audited regularly and we report to the Home Office on a very regular basis. So, yeah, security is sort of, number 1, 2, and 3 priority if you're growing medical cannabis in this country.
Yeah. Let's bring up a share price chart. We were talking about this before we went to air, and really asking you, I think, to talk about what investors will be buying in at this sort of level of share price. Talk to me about where we are and the next steps you're hoping to achieve.
Yeah. So looking at the share price chart, we're experiencing what a lot of other very small companies are experiencing at the moment, where we're out of favor. And I think that is, obviously my view is that is going to change. I think the medical cannabis space is definitely a great place to be, because healthcare generally is a growing industry. And we're really focused at our work on site in developing our flower product with the building of our facility that we're putting together at the moment. And with this acquisition of MRX, we can bring oil to the market immediately, and then look to the commencement and then the completion of these clinical trials. So lots going on, and I think we're pretty good. We report to shareholders on a very regular basis, so we're always in touch with shareholders, telling them what we're doing, explaining what we're doing and why, and the milestones that we achieve. So yeah, look, always confident, of course, because I'm completely determined that we're going to build a very successful pharmaceutical business that focuses on inflammatory pain conditions and uses cannabis as medicine to do that.
We've spoken all about Ananda. Just very quickly, I wanted you to comment on an RNS we saw pass recently from Celadon Pharmaceuticals announcing Home Office approval of a license for commercial sale of GMP cannabis. How much of a benefit is this to you as a company and to the wider picture, these sort of headlines?
Yeah. Absolutely positive. One of the issues in the medical cannabis space has been a lack of understanding of exactly how you go from an idea to research growing of medical cannabis, and going through all the various regulatory stages to get the MHRA approvals and ultimately the Home Office approvals to grow commercially and sell commercial flower or oil into the UK market, and then obviously overseas. So seeing Celadon achieve that shows every doubter that they should not doubt. They need to be engaged in the space, because medical cannabis is here to stay as a medicine, and Celadon has proven that the pathway is able to be achieved. And so I think it puts paid to a lot of doubters, and they've done it in a really professional way. And it is fantastic for all of us that they have led the charge.
Good. Here's to the believers. Melissa, it's a pleasure. Thanks indeed for joining us. Melissa Sturgess, Chief Executive of Ananda Developments.